It's February 14th. You probably think of cards, flowers, and sweet chocolates. Valentine's Day, the day of romance. A day for couples to cherish each other, and a day when those who are single quietly hope for something special. But what if I told you that on this very day, one of the most brutal massacres in history took place? And that the story of February 14th might not be as romantic as you think? This is a tale of the day when love and crime collided. A day when bullets flew while roses bloomed. A day marked by the same date, 14th of February, but with stories that are completely opposite. Today, we'll uncover the dark secrets of Valentine's Day. And trust me, after hearing this, you'll never look at those heart-shaped cards the same way again. Let's travel back in time to February 14th, 1929. To Chicago, the city of cold winds and bloody wars. This was the Prohibition era, when alcohol was banned, and organized crime flourished like mushrooms after rain. In Chicago, two of the city's most notorious gangs were locked in a brutal struggle for power. On one side was Al Capone, the kingpin of organized crime, dubbed Public Enemy Number 1 by the press. On the other was George "Bugs" Moran, the leader of the North Side Gang. Gang warfare ruled the streets of Chicago during the late 1920s, as chief gangster Al Capone sought to consolidate control by eliminating his rivals in the illegal trades of bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. These two men despised each other to the core. Capone wanted to monopolize Chicago's illegal liquor trade. Moran wanted exactly the same thing. And in their world, negotiations weren't settled with words but with bullets. This war had been raging for years. In 1924, authorities counted some 16 gang-related murders. This brand of slaying continued until 1929, reaching a high of 64 murders in 1 year during that time. 64 murders in a single year. That's an average of more than 1 death per week over bootlegged liquor. But on February 14th, 1929, Capone devised a special plan. A plan to end this war once and for all. Some sources state that on February 13th, 1929, Moran received a phone call offering a truckload of hijacked Purple Gang whiskey for sale. He told the caller to deliver it to the garage at 21222 North Clark Street in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago's North Side at 10:30 a.m. Capone's plan was diabolically clever. He would lure Moran and his men with a fake shipment of liquor. They would gather at a garage at 2122 North Clark Street on the morning of February 14th to receive the delivery. But instead of whiskey, they would receive bullets. On the morning of February 14th, 1929, Chicago was freezing cold. A thin layer of snow dusted the sidewalks like powdered sugar. Across the city, bakeries and flower shops were bustling with preparations for Valentine's Day. At 10:30 a.m., 7 men were in the garage at 2122 North Clark Street, waiting for the truck. They were chatting, maybe joking, completely unaware that these would be the final moments of their lives. Suddenly, a black Cadillac, identical to a police car, pulled up in front of the garage. 4 men dressed as police officers entered gangster Bugs Moran's headquarters on North Clark Street in Chicago, line 7 of Moran's henchmen against a wall, and shoot them to death. 4 men stepped out. 2 were dressed in police uniforms, and 2 were in plain clothes but wearing detective badges. They entered the garage with the professional air of law enforcement. Raid! Everyone faced the wall. This wasn't the first time Moran's gang had been raided by police. They complied obediently, hands raised, facing the wall. They might have thought, just another routine check. We'll bribe them and be released as usual. They were wrong, completely wrong. The 7 men were lined up facing a wall and shot with Thompson machine guns and a shotgun. 70 rounds were fired from the Thompsons, and 1 cartridge was discharged from the shotgun. In that quiet garage, the roar of Thompson's submachine guns suddenly erupted. 70 rounds in a matter of seconds. The brutal sound of metal tearing through the air. The 7 men fell almost simultaneously. 6 of the victims died immediately. 1 lived for a short while but refused to identify the killers. 1 man survived for a few minutes, but when the real police arrived, he refused to name the killers. The fake police then walked out calmly, as if they had just completed a routine task. They even staged a performance. The 2 plainclothes men raised their hands as if under arrest, while the 2 officers escorted them to the car. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like an ordinary arrest. No one suspected that a massacre had just taken place. But here's the ironic twist. Bugs Moran, the primary target of the entire plan, wasn't in the garage at the time. Some sources say Moran saw the police outside and decided not to go in. He thought it was a real raid and didn't want to get caught. That caution saved his life. The massacre changed everything. Though Americans had never been very happy with the effects of prohibition, they weren't clamoring to do something about it. But the slaughter of 7 men, with gruesome photos flung nationwide in newsprint, proved too much to stomach for many. Images of the 7 bodies in the garage were published in newspapers across America. The public was horrified by the brutality. This was no longer just underworld business. It was a public tragedy. The president-elect, Herbert Hoover, had made criminal justice a central part of his campaign. Now, as he vacationed in Florida and prepared for his inauguration, the reverberation of gangland savagery shook the nation. The Valentines Day massacre spurred the federal government to take stronger action against organized crime. Capone, though never convicted for this crime, became the FBI's top target. The Saint Valentine's Day massacre, as it was known, remains an unsolved crime and was never officially linked to Capone, but he was generally considered to have been responsible for the murders. Nearly 100 years later, the Saint Valentine's Day massacre remains an officially unsolved case. Capone had a perfect alibi. He was in Florida when the massacre occurred. Fred "Killer" Burke, a well-known bank robber and hired gun. Burke's machine guns were the same ones used in the Saint Valentine's Day massacre. Although police found the machine guns used in the massacre at Burke's home, he was never prosecuted. Perhaps that was Capone's art, never leaving direct evidence, always having others do the dirty work. Coincidentally, February 14th is also a day of great beginnings. And the first story also ties back to Chicago. On February 14th, 1876, exactly 53 years before the Valentine's Day massacre, Bell's lawyer filed Bell's application with the Patent Office for an invention that would change the world, the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell, a teacher of the deaf in Boston, filed a patent for a method of transmitting sound by electricity. Interestingly, that same morning, Bell's lawyer filed Bell's application with the Patent Office. There is considerable debate about who arrived first, and Gray later challenged the primacy of Bell's patent. Elisha Gray filed a similar application that same day, just hours apart. This patent race was no less dramatic than the gang wars in Chicago. But instead of guns, they used paperwork and lawyers. On March the 7th, 1876, 29-year-old Alexander Graham Bell receives a patent for his revolutionary new invention, the telephone. 3 days after receiving the patent, Bell made the first ever telephone call.
Mr. Watson, come here, I want you.
A tool that connects people, sharing love, on the very day that, 53 years later, criminals would sever the connections of 7 lives. Ironic, isn't it? And then, on February 14, 1990, exactly 61 years after the massacre, NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft, the Earth images were taken at 4:48 GMT on February 14, 1990, just 34 minutes before Voyager 1 powered off its cameras forever. NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft, 6 billion kilometers from Earth, turned back to look at its home and captured the most famous image in the history of space exploration: the pale blue dot. In the photograph, Earth's apparent size is less than a pixel. The planet appears as a tiny dot against the vastness of space, among bands of sunlight reflected by the camera. The idea for this photo came from Carl Sagan, the renowned astronomer and writer. He knew Earth would appear as a tiny speck, but that was the point. The Voyager team wanted humanity to see Earth's vulnerability and that our homeworld is just a tiny, fragile speck in the cosmic ocean. Sagan wrote about the image. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. Think about it. The Valentines Day massacre, the gang wars in Chicago, all the ambitions and hatreds of humanity, all took place on that tiny blue dot. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. But why February 14th? Why did Valentine's Day become the day of love? The story begins in ancient Rome. February was the month of Lupercalia, an ancient religious festival tied to fertility and love. Later, the Catholic Church Christianized this festival by associating it with Saint Valentine. But here's an interesting detail. Saint Valentine was executed on February 14th, 270. For what crime? For secretly performing marriages for soldiers when Emperor Claudius II banned them from marrying. So, from the start, Valentine's Day was a day of death. Death for love. Death for defending the right to love. Perhaps the universe had it planned all along. February 14th is a day when love and death go hand in hand. Looking at the events of February 14th, I see a strange pattern. Year 270. Saint Valentine is executed for defending love. Year 1876. Bell files the patent for the telephone, a tool to connect people. Year 1929. The Valentine's Day. Massacre, severing connections through violence. Year 1990. Pale blue dot, reminding us of the connection of all humanity. Do you see it? February 14th is like a day of connection and disconnection, of love and hatred, of hope and despair. Perhaps this is the nature of love. It always comes with risk. The risk of being hurt, the risk of betrayal, the risk of loss. But that's not strange enough. Look at other events that happened on February 14th. February 14th, 1929. Not only the day of the massacre, but also the day American newspapers began calling Al Capone public enemy number one. From then on, the term became synonymous with American crime. February 14th, 1945. During World War II, Dresden, one of Europe's most beautiful cities, was heavily bombed. Thousands of civilians died in a 3-day firestorm. February 14th, 2005, YouTube was founded, a platform that would change how people share and connect, and also how they judge and attack one another. February 14th, 2018, the Parkland, Florida school shooting. 17 people died on Valentine's Day. Do you see the pattern? February 14th seems to be a day where technology and violence intertwine, where love and death stand side by side. There's an interesting psychological theory. Humans tend to group events that happen on the same day, even if they're completely unrelated. But with February 14th, I wonder if it's really just a coincidence. Perhaps Valentine's Day creates a special kind of emotional energy. Days when human emotions are heightened, whether love or hatred, are often days when unusual events occur. In Chicago in 1929, perhaps the irony of staging a massacre on the Day of Love made it perfect in Capone's eyes. A message that in his world, there was no room for love or mercy. Or maybe it's simpler. February 14th is just another day, and we, with our pattern-seeking brains, create connections that don't exist. So, what do we learn from these contrasting stories of February 14th? First, love and violence can coexist in a single day, in a single moment, even in a single person. Capone had a wife and children, people he loved, but that didn't stop him from being a cold-blooded killer. Second, technology can be a tool for both love and hatred. The telephone helps lovers communicate, but it also helped gangs coordinate crimes. The internet connects people but also spreads hate. Third, perspective changes everything. From space, the Valentine's Day. Massacre is just a tiny event on a tiny blue dot. But for the victims' families, it was their entire world collapsing. Today, Valentine's Day has become a billion-dollar love industry. Americans spend about $25 billion annually on this day. Roses, chocolates, jewelry, expensive dinners. But one thing hasn't changed. February 14th is still a day when human emotions are pushed to the extreme. Extreme joy for some, extreme sadness for others. Statistics show that February 14th is one of the days with the highest suicide rates of the year, especially among those who are lonely. Ironically, the Day of Love is a day of death for some. Psychologists call this Valentine's Day depression, a syndrome where societal expectations of happiness make those without partners feel like failures more than ever. So, there you have it, February 14th. On one side, the sweetness of love. On the other, the pain of betrayal and cold blood. On one side, connection through technology. On the other, isolation in the vast universe. Perhaps this is a reminder that every day in life has two sides. That behind every story we think we know, there's a secret waiting to be uncovered. Or maybe February 14th is the perfect metaphor for human nature. We're capable of boundless love, but also of bottomless cruelty. We can create marvelous inventions like the telephone, but we can also use them for nefarious purposes. When you look up at the sky tonight, remember that we're just tiny specks on a tiny blue dot in the vast universe. Our quarrels, our hatreds, our ambitions, they're all so small from a cosmic perspective. But from that same perspective, every act of love, every gesture of kindness, every moment of connection becomes infinitely precious. Because in a cold and vast universe, we only have each other. This year, when you receive a Valentine's card or give flowers to someone, remember that you're partaking in a tradition with a complex and contradictory history. But also remember this. In a world that can be as brutal as the North Clark Street garage, choosing to love is an act of courage. Choosing connection over disconnection, building over destroying, embracing instead of pulling the trigger. Capone chose violence and ended his life in prison. Bell chose connection and left an eternal legacy. Carl Sagan chose to look far and reminded us of our small but precious place in the universe. And you? What will you choose for your Valentine's Day? What do you think about the mysteries of Valentine's Day? Is February 14th truly a special day? Or are we just creating connections in our minds? Perhaps the answer isn't as important as what we learn from these stories. That history is never simple, that every day holds unexpected stories. That love and cruelty can coexist, and the choice is up to us. So the next time someone says, Valentine's Day is just a commercial holiday, tell them about the North Clark Street garage, about Tilly Smith saving 100 people from a tsunami, about Carl Sagan seeing Earth from billions of kilometers away. Because in the end, every day can be a Valentine's Day. A day to choose love over hate, connection over division. Thank you for listening. Love more. Connect more sincerely. And remember, in this vast universe, we're all living on the same tiny blue dot.